Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Value the Markets video presentation and question and answer session with Mike Houston of BlueRock Diamonds. Tonight we'll be taking a look at BlueRock's progress over the last year since Mike and the new team took over. The company's advanced its projects in South Africa to a great extent, and Mike's going to give us quite a comprehensive update this evening on where the business is at and where he plans to take it in the future. We'll start with a very brief presentation from Mike, followed by a question and answer session. While Mike is presenting, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen an area where viewers can type questions. We've already received a number of questions in advance, which we'll be putting to Mike, but if there's anything that you would like to ask, please type it in the bottom right and our moderator will feed those questions through. So I'll now hand over to Mike, who'll give us the presentation, and we'll then have our question and answer session. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, all, and thank you for your interest in BlueRock Diamonds. I'll go straight into the presentation. Slide one, really looking at production over the year 2019. We recently announced our quarter four and annual results. But just a bit of background, we appointed a new CEO, a mining engineer, at the mine late April, early May. And he immediately had an impact on the operations. And I think if we just roll down the recent quarter four update, it showed for the financial year 2019, production was up 70% to 323,000, and for the quarter up 108% at 110 versus 2018. Also, we saw an improved grade. We were mining largely one pipe during the year, but we saw an improvement in grade, 434 carats per 100 tons versus 3.28, and for quarter four, 4.65 versus 401. These were all within the guidance, and then finally, I think importantly, on the average price we received at 24% up at 415 US a carat versus 334, and then 30% for the quarter four at 410 versus 316. So it's been a very challenging but very positive year for BlueRock Diamonds, and the operational team need to be commended for the progress being made. We did say in April/May that we felt that a lot of these things were doable. It just needed a little bit more, a little stronger technical management on the ground. If we can go to slide two, please, Ben. Slide two looks at the cost per carat. These are obviously unaudited. We started talking about costs in August, September 2019. But for the second half, unaudited, we're looking at $275 per carat. 2018 was about $400 per carat. And I mean, I think the key things that are driving this are obviously getting the production up, because we're lowering fixed costs and becoming a little bit more efficient. That's linked to improved operational management. And we brought in our strategic partner, Tashman, to run the open cast mining, and they, together with African Drill and Blast, who've been with us quite a while, provide a very professional service in that key area of the business. Management obviously continue to investigate costs, and we do talk a little bit about this later on, but the key issues, and they all impact positively on the life of mine economics, is looking at the cost of electricity. At the moment, we run on generators. It's about 3 times the price of national grid power. So we're looking at how we can get onto the national grid, and we're advancing discussions there. We believe there's an opportunity to materially increase volumes. The resource can handle it, and we're looking at that. And then very importantly is increasing the recoveries from the in-situ diamonds, and that's really linked to being able to crush the what I would call the tailings, crush that down from -18, which is a normal size we put through, to -8. And there's another somewhere in the region of 30%, sorry, 25%, 20 to 25% additional diamonds that you can recover through that crushing process. Obviously, you're covering smaller diamonds, but when one looks at the revenue versus the cost, it's an exercise that all mining companies do. Up to now, BlueRock hasn't been able to do that. We can go on to slide 3 if we may. Just a little bit about the resource. The life of mine currently is around sort of 10 to 12 years on the 350, 400,000 tons a year. Management believe that the resource can sustain a lot higher production. The main reason for that, I think, is if you can get your costs down, which we're doing, and we can believe we can get them a fair bit lower, you can obviously mine deeper in these pipes that we have at the mine. And at the moment, we've got relatively conservative depths in this resource table. So, once we're more confident with the cost structures, etc., you obviously have an opportunity to take these pits to a greater depth. Just for the record, I mean, KV1 and KV2, which sit 50 meters apart, are the two key pipes at the moment, and we've now are joining those and mining them out as one pipe. KV5, which we did do test work on, generally better priced than our other two pipes, and we'll be opening that up in 2020. It should be operational in the third quarter of this year. And then KV3, which is the largest pipe. At this stage, the main reason we're doing test work is that a large piece of that pipe has not been included in the resource, and we want to just test that area as we believe it could host a grade that would allow us to bring us into the resource. Okay. The future plans, a three-step approach. We did put this to people in May. Basically, our first step was to try and bring some stability to the operation and get into a profitable situation, which we did in the second half of the year. Step 2 is where we are now, where we've had an opportunity to look at what we believe would be an ideal level to optimize the resource. And, that's something that, we want to, we're doing quite a lot of work presently, and sometime during the first quarter, we'd like to come back to talk to people about it. Looks very interesting. And then clearly, once we've done that and got this mine up to at the level that we believe it should be running at, which lowers the fixed cost element and obviously generates sound cash flows, we would then look at other opportunities. And as we've put there, looking at other opportunities within the diamond sector, but probably with the technical team we have other opportunities just generally within the mining sector, and see if we can't grow the business. Okay. So I think in summary, the new management team with a strong technical capacity is delivering, and I think the most important thing for me is that with the challenges that you have in these small mining operations, you need a team that's able to arrive at solutions quickly and deal with them, and we've got that skill set on site now, and we're actually seeing considerable improvements happening with that. We're just looking at the share price, which doubled from the last capital raise in May. It's certainly outperformed the benchmark indices, and we think that the flatness of it, over the last 6 months or so, is not reflective of the recent successes. And we're obviously giving thoughts as to what we can do to enhance that situation. The growth strategy I mentioned earlier, we're developing this plan to increase production and importantly reducing costs with it. And then the growth strategy to maximize value to shareholders, as I mentioned earlier, is really about what we do, but that would be, a couple of years from now when we've got this operation really up to its full capacity. I think the potential future company revaluation, I think if one looks at our average price, which over this last year has been around the $400 a carat, we're assuming somewhere around 380 going forward, bringing into play this additional 25% recovery of diamonds, and they're obviously at a lower price, but higher revenue flows. Our costs at the moment are down at 275. We've got an opportunity with power to reduce that materially, and with the higher volumes, the ratio of fixed and variable is a big impact. You've got your overhead costs with the AIM listing and that sort of thing. That all, on a fixed basis, drops dramatically as you push that tonnage up in terms of the unit cost. And I've covered the improved recovery, but there's really a nice mix of things here: volume, cost, and recovery to just maximise this resource.
Okay, Mike. Well, look, thank you very much for that. That's a very interesting overview of the company and the progress that you've made over the last year. I remember we spoke on a private basis at about the time of the fundraise when you had just taken over, and you obviously you told me plans then since, and I think in broad terms you've really fulfilled what you originally promised to the market. What would you say has been the biggest success over the last year? If you were really to sort of point to one thing that's really changed within the company, what would you say is the company's biggest achievement so far?
Well, sorry, getting a bit of a rebound here. I think the most critical thing that we needed to change was the appreciation that, despite the operation being relatively small at that stage, and it obviously still is in the context of mining companies, it still needed a certain level of technical competence. And by us being able to find a strong mining engineer who was excited about the future of BlueRock himself, and saw the potential of it when he visited the operation, to get someone of the status we've got to get in and run the operation, and then we've built a good team around him, and we continue to do that. And I think that in itself, everything feeds off that. If you've got good people with good skills, and you've got a resource that is capable of delivering positive shareholder value, they just roll off each other. So I think that's been the most critical thing, is getting the right people in place, and certainly the timing of improvements is linked directly to that.
No, so I mean, as you know, I'm not currently a shareholder in the company, but as I say, it is a stock that is on my watch list. I've obviously heard loud and clear from you the importance of the team, and how that really does give the company an opportunity to grow. And one of the things that really leapt out for me in your presentation, I'll just take us back to slide 4, is your step 3 and your growth plans. So, I mean, obviously you've broadly speaking delivered step 1. You've achieved operational profitability, as you recently announced. I think I'm right in saying that H2 was profitable last year, if I understand RNS correctly.
Unaudited, yes.
Exactly, unaudited, yeah, of course. So just to emphasise that, and we're now
operationally profitable, yeah. Okay.
Operationally profitable, exactly. And we're now moving into step 2, where you're obviously looking to increase volumes, increase overall production and optimize profitability. But I think sort of looking to the longer term and the growth plans, you talked about evaluating other projects. Are you currently evaluating other projects at the moment? Do you have anything in the pipeline? Is there anything that's caught your attention?
We're not at the moment, Ben, and deliberately not doing so, because there's so much to do with where we are in our life cycle with this particular project. We're having people talk to us, and obviously we keep the door open, but our focus with a relatively small team is to keep up the improvements that we've put in, and then lift this to the next level. And I think once you put in the building blocks of that, and you get the costs in the right place, and the operations running in what we would call mining norm terms, you then have time, and certainly the skill set is there, both technically and London facing, if you like, or market facing, to be able to look at other things. We obviously feel, and I haven't said it in this presentation, it might be there, is that, if in 2 years' time there's nothing exciting out there that we think is accretive to shareholders in terms of growth, then we would really look at having an aggressive dividend structure back, giving the money back to shareholders. It's that sort of business. We're either going to find things, but if we don't, we would do what we think is best for shareholders.
That's very interesting, and there's certainly a lot of mining companies in the mining space on AIM that could learn from that. Okay, well let's talk then about a bit more about moving to the next level. So step 2, as we can see on the slide in front of us. From what I've learned about the company over the last few days, one of your major objectives is to address, I say, power issues. You mentioned in your presentation at the moment that the diesel generators cost roughly, I think, 3 times what it would cost if you hook the mine up to the national grid. Have I reported that correctly?
It's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So we had a question from one shareholder I noticed, who said that what risk is there attached to connecting to the national grid, given the recent brownouts that South Africa has experienced?
Well, I mean, it's a very good question, and one that one has to think carefully about, because there is a capital cost of getting the overhead line to the mine. It's not on a circuit at this stage. But I think what's happening with South Africa, and hopefully Eskom will resolve its issues in due course. But having worked in Tanzania and a couple of other countries of that, where power is an issue, the critical thing is trying to get as best balance you can to lower the unit cost of power. And if you can get 70% national grid and 30% generator, or 20% generator and 10% solar, or something like that, and that gives you a kilowatt hour price that's reasonably competitive, that's the route you want to go, because power does form a pretty material part of the cost structure, particularly if when you're running 100% of generators. So we would hope that Eskom gets its act together, and I think there's a lot of pressure from the bigger industrial people to try and make sure that happens. But and we'll evaluate it on the basis of what we believe is a likely on time, if you like, of national grid power vis-a-vis the capital cost, and that's really part of this evaluation that we're doing at the moment.
So just feeding into that, I think you've already answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway. So Brandon has asked us, he's asked explicitly whether the team has started the process of linking up to the electricity grid, but I'll let you answer.
Well, the only thing that we've done is we've had the discussions with Eskom, who have indicated that the power will be available to us. Then you have to make an application for it. And then we've had discussions with people that are contractors that are, if you like, deemed as being creditable to put up the power line. And we've got, obviously, initial quotes and so on. But the key is obviously linking in, and there's a small deposit that you pay to be able to be assured that you're on if you like, the plan of Eskom for future users. This isn't a big job to do. I think it's probably about a 90-day start to finish job, exercise once we push the button. But clearly we've got a bit to do before then.
Right. Well, I mean that's also then answered a question which we had from Robin, who asked about the timeline. So you're saying so at the moment the company hasn't initiated it, it's obviously evaluating, but once you do push the button and start this next phase of development, it will take you about 90 days.
Yeah.
Understood. So in terms then of the other changes that you'll make operationally within the mine to increase output? I noted in your presentation, you said that you'd hope, or management hopes, to be able to increase output to 800,000 tonnes a year. Now, obviously, the current mine life is 10 to 12 years based on, I think, was it 350 or 400,000 tonnes?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so
but it's probably a bit longer because there's 7, I think in the resource we're saying there's 7 million, somewhere around 7 million tonnes. Whether all of that's economically mineable is the question, but it's probably a little longer at these lower, at the figures that we're running at now. But if you move up to 7 to 800,000, then obviously 7 million at the current depths that are deemed suitable. That's your life of mine, yeah.
Right, obviously. So in other words, it might bring the life of mine down slightly, but obviously the trade-off for that is it will be, sort of increased, accelerated cash flow generation.
I think, Ben, there's two things here. I mean, by lowering the unit cost, I mean, this is a critical issue. By lowering the unit cost and improving that recovery to plus 90% of the in situ diamonds, you suddenly have a situation where the economic depth of each of your pipes has the opportunity. You obviously have the opportunity of going deeper. You've got a strip ratio down to a certain depth. You put in that cost structure, and you establish if it's economically sensible to do it. But by dropping our costs the way we're doing at the moment, of which power is a part of, and lowering the fixed costs, it then allows us to reevaluate each pit in terms of its grade and the strip ratio, and obviously we think that the resource can be increased materially through that mix of opportunity.
I understand. So again, just in layperson's terms, I've taken us back to the slide which shows the 5 pipes. And you mentioned in the presentation, I've also seen in your recent RNSs that you're talking about turning pipes K1 and K2 into a single open pit. Is there potential to expand the resource there because you're effectively mining one pipe, or is it still 2 pipes being mined out of the one pit?
No, I think it's just efficient to mine the 2 together. But if you take KV1 and KV2, KV2 was the tonnage and carats in KV2 was based on an 80-meter depth. KV1 was 60 meters. KV5 I think was 40 meters. And KV3, I think, was 60 or 80 meters. So you can see from those depths, they're pretty conservative. Well, we think they're pretty conservative, and they might have been, they were probably done at quite a higher unit cost to where we're going to. So we think there's an opportunity certainly to take some of those pipes down deeper, which gives you a bigger tonnage, which extends the life of mine longer. That's a sort of, I don't know if that's in good enough layman's language, but it is really about your unit cost and recovering more of the diamonds, which giving you more revenue effectively allows you to go deeper and increase the life of mine.
Yeah, no, that definitely does make sense. And we've been asked a few questions by shareholders as well, I've noticed, about current PLC overheads. Now, I'm very conscious that I don't ask you anything that would require inside information, because, of course, you can only release that via RNS. But in terms of your current PLC cost base, are you able to give us an idea how it compares to the last set of figures?
Well, we don't think. I mean, we obviously put out half-year accounts for 2019, and we don't think we don't believe that the second half will be materially higher. The issue with our PLC is that we're obviously, as we're getting bigger, having to look at your executive side, and some of those costs move up to the PLC, others stay in the operational unit. So I think one's got to look at it as we move on. One's got to look at it in terms of its ratio to what to the size of the company as it grows too.
No, I understand. So, and sort of in relation then to the PLC costs, we've got a question here from Tommy, which is, it's a bit of a hardball here, but let's throw it anyway. He's asked you if you can confirm what the severance costs for the previous CEO were in 2019. Is that something you're able to talk about?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say on that is that he obviously had a contract with a termination clause, and we negotiated inside of that agreement. Obviously that contract was set up some years before I was involved in BlueRock Diamond, but he had a specific clause, and we managed to settle within his agreement.
Okay, and it's probably also worth pointing out for Tommy, obviously, that when the audited accounts come out, it's obviously standard practice that the directors' remuneration, even ex-directors in the previous 12 months, that is reported. So I expect that will be a figure that ends up in the public domain once it's officially released.
That's true.
Okay, so we've got a question here from Grant, which is another good question. So Grant's asked us, when does the company feel it will be in a position to issue 2020 guidance for production, costs associated for production, etc.?
It's all, this is all very closely linked to this evaluation work we're doing on going forward. But we would hope to have this all completed in Q1. And, as part of that, we would clearly then give a very detailed update on what 2020 would look like in the context of that picture.
Okay. So I guess again in that context, Joel's asked a question here. It's a bit of a long one, so I'll try and shorten it a bit. So I think what Joel's asking is that assuming, so if a shareholder looks at, or an investor looks at what's been reported by the company, and we assume that current production rates and increased sales are achieved, costs remain broadly stable, do you expect that the company could be net profitable over the course of 2020?
I would certainly hope so, because if we've talked publicly about targeting 40,000 tons a month average. We've got the wet season where we're a bit lower, and then we can obviously push it above 40,000 in the better months. So we've talked about that as being the sort of average tonnage that we were targeting without any expansion plans. You've got the average carat that we've been earning. There's no reason why that should change dramatically, and you've got what we estimate. Our costs were in the second half, and there's no reason why they should change dramatically going forward. If I'm just looking at a like with like period. So and if you look at those numbers, we would certainly hope that that we would be net profitable in 2020.
It sounds very encouraging. So, I mean, obviously, with your market cap currently at give or take 4 million, and the resource valuation at I think it's $120 million. I'm just looking for the slide where it says. There's obviously there's a value case to be made, then, isn't there, for the company, given the expected life of mine, the improvements you've already made, and the fact that you appear to be able to maintain sort of the production at least at the current levels, with obviously the opportunity to expand.
Yes, I certainly believe so, and we've encouraged a really good executive manager to come on board. And I think that should give shareholders the confidence that someone on the ground really believes that what we're looking at is doable, and they're really the key players in all of this at the end of the day.
So just that actually leads us in quite nicely to this question that we have here from Robin. You touched on the wet season a couple of minutes ago. So Robin's asked us, you were planning to put aside a lot of ore to help you keep production levels high during this wet quarter. How is that process going, and what production are you projecting for this quarter? I think in general terms, how has the process of putting ore to one side to maintain production levels gone?
Yeah, I mean, the wet season is an ongoing learning curve, to be honest. But what we are finding is that the more crushed material you've got as a backup, so when you have two really bad days of rain, which does stop these operations because you just can't handle the material whatsoever. But if you've got this built-up stock of crushed material, you can then run really hard again. For the period, and then and pick up a part of that lost production. But I mean, I think we've mentioned it. I mentioned it somewhere in the piece, but I don't want to talk about what we think the first quarter will be, but what I will say is that it will be materially higher than what we did in quarter one 2019, and percentage-wise not materially lower than the overall average for the year. You know, it's really about how much bad weather you get, but in general, we feel we can manage it a lot better than we've done in the past.
Okay, so I guess then that leads us to another issue. So let's talk a bit about the most recent RNS and the demonstrations experienced at the site. We've had a few questions put by shareholders, but I'll ask Rob's one because that broadly covers all of them. So Rob's asked us, can you explain in more detail the protests that occurred, please, and are they frequent occurrences?
Yeah, that's a good question, Rob. And you know, obviously, South Africa at the moment does have a situation where demonstrations are fairly frequent events. And although one doesn't see a lot of it in the British news, they do happen pretty frequently at a lot of the operations. Our situation, I mean, we've got a good working relationship with our community. It's a relatively small community, but it supplies a lot of our labour. But we have recently announced that we are going to abide by the new regulations in South Africa, which provides 5% of the local company as for the local community, 5% for employees, 5% for the local community. And I think, you know, this obviously creates some interest amongst the parties, and this particular demonstration was really about our smaller local community saying, you know, we want to make sure that we're not left out of any of the, if you like, the company's dealings in terms of its social commitments, and of course they wouldn't be. You know, we obviously were disappointed, as I said in that announcement, that it had to end up being a demonstration as against, you know, just coming and seeing us with their grievances and us, you know, talking with them and resolving what we can. But you know, the community felt it maybe needed to express itself. There was minimal loss of production. Our CEO on the ground feels very comfortable with the relationship he has. Yes, we've got some, you know, tough discussions still to have, but we don't believe that any of this can't be resolved amicably. I don't know if that gives you a good feel.
Yeah, so I mean, look, I appreciate obviously it's a difficult situation. So, but you feel that you're making progress then in resolving the local issue, so that this won't become sort of, you know, sort of something that might sort of blossom into a further disruption.
No, it's not, you know, it's not like a land issue or a, you know, those sort of, you know, that type of problem. This is very much to do with what the local people are feeling they would like the company to do for them. And obviously, you know, we can understand, we've got empathy with that because, you know, life's not easy. But at the same time, it's, you know, in many cases, it's about balancing what people want with affordability and so on. And it's really something that one has to resolve with your communities. But we feel comfortable we can do that, and we don't believe this is an issue that's going to be you know, of concern going forward.
Okay. Understood. Okay, so let's switch our focus a bit then to the actual stones that you're mining. I've got a couple of questions here that I was sent via social media, but I'll start with the question that again Robin's put another one to us. So he's actually asked three questions all in one. So let's just start with the first. What's your policy in terms of RNSing big stones?
Well, we used to announce. If the stone was valued at $50,000 or more. Mm-hmm. And then the board decided that, because we had quite a run of that, and obviously as the company was growing a bit, we decided that we should make that stones that have got a value of $100,000 or more. That we would then announce, you know, we would obviously, the process is you can get evaluated and people give you as best understanding as they believe you'll fetch for that stone, but you only really know when it goes into public tender. So we would announce it, and then obviously we would confirm it when the tender went through. So that's our situation as far as announcements are concerned.
I see. So, I mean that again, this feeds into Robin's next question. This that would explain why there haven't been so many of those updates recently, because you've increased the threshold for what you actually announce.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. In these pipes, it's not sort of a straight line. Out of every 100 tons, you get a guaranteed big stone. We had a run where we had quite a lot of big stones, and now we've had a run where we haven't had a lot of the bigger stones. And it might be the area of the pipe that we're mining. That it does vary, although the experts will tell you that dependent on the average size of your stone, you should then get a range of stones from X to Y at some point in time in that resource. And the larger your average size is, the opportunity of obviously the bigger stones, etc. And this is, I guess, historical information that's been garnered over many years from these different pipes around the world. But so we've got a reasonably sized average size stone, and we believe that we'll get our fair share of high value diamonds. You don't know when you're going to hit the really big one, or if you ever will, but you should get a good sprinkling of diamonds that make a material difference to your average price. And you never know when you're going to get a coloured one that's particularly highly valued or not. It just depends from pipe to pipe. This can vary just depending on the geological occurrence that happened, in the past. So that's really the situation. It is something that seems to go in cycles. But obviously, the higher you get your tonnage up, the less you are reliant on your high value stones in terms of your run of mine average price. So when they come in, they are all bottom line players, and that's where we want to go. We want to get to a situation with our run of mine diamonds, and we get a very high level of sort of 1 to 5 carat, very good quality diamonds, and that give us a price range that we want to be able to comfortably finance the operations, and then your big stones are sweeteners when they come.
Right, understood. So Colm, connected to this, Colm's asked us a question. He's asking whether can management start providing monthly tender revenue figures, not necessarily via RNS, but could it be on the BlueRock Twitter account if LSE regulation allows? Is that something that the board has considered at all?
Well, we did because we were making quite regular announcements in the early days when there were smaller milestones. But once we stabilized the production, we felt that that quarterly announcement gave a better cyclical reporting system than more frequent announcements. But we're open to debate on these things, and it might be that encourages more activity on the share price. But at the same time, you can get highs and lows, which sort of roll themselves out in mining. And so we were feeling more comfortable with a quarterly cycle, quarterly reporting. And then obviously, if there's a big stone or there's something material that we want to talk about, whether it's we've put in a piece of this or a piece of plant or something that's exciting, then we would report on that. But as a general reporting, our preference is to keep it to quarterly.
Yeah, so you're looking just really to smooth out the variance so that you're not exposed to, if there's 1 month where you don't have, you necessarily had sort of a particularly high yield, and then obviously the next month is a very high yield. You're looking to smooth that out through less regular reporting, so you get a better average idea.
And these sort of operations do sort of lean themselves towards that. You can get in one pit, between one area and another, you can get very high grades, and next door it can be moderate grades. And so it just depends where you happen to be mining. I think what's important in that subject is, as we open up KV2 again, and we mine in KV1 and open KV5, you've then got 3 pits, which you can obviously, you can mine from 3 different areas, and you can blend, and you can probably get much more consistency, in your average grade. And that's where we're trying to go, and we will be there certainly. I think in the second quarter, all 3 pits will be operational.
Well, actually, that then really does fit in well into Joel's question here, which he said, when does the company expect to be in a position to share with shareholders the step change planned to accelerate revenues in 2020 and beyond, please? I think you've just answered part of that question, but do you maybe want to speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we will definitely be coming back to talk about our new plans in quarter 1. So it'll be as soon as we possibly can, but certainly within quarter 1. No doubt about that.
Excellent. So, okay, we have a question here from Milo, who's asked what the current situation with the 3rd pan installation is.
Yeah, this pan we put in some months ago, and it's operating well. What we had is a situation where we had 2 pans, and when we were running at capacity, both pans were running right on the line, if I can put it that way, which is not an ideal thing to do from recovery. So we put a 3rd pan in to do 2 things. Firstly, to give us increased volume when we had it, and that works well in our circumstances now. But then to also allow us to run 3 pans at, say, 85% instead of 2 at 100, or 99%. So, and it just gives you much better controls and the flow to them and so on. So it's running well, and it's adding a lot of value, particularly in this wet season where you might have a day or 2 where you get low production, and then you can push it hard because you've got crushed material sitting on the side. Then you can then run all 3 pans pretty hard for a few days, catch up. So it's been a big positive at this stage.
Yeah, so just so I've understood, so in layperson's terms, what you're saying is by not having the 2 current pans running at full capacity, by having the 3rd one in place, you're obviously increasing overall capacity, but you're lessening the load or lightening the load on each of the pans because they're at what, 85, 90, like you said. Yeah,
absolutely. That's you got they run about 40 tons each, so. You had 2 at 80, 3 at 120. So we used to battle to get it to run at 80. You'd be pushing it really hard. So now we can run comfortably, when we want to at 105, 110, but we can step it up if we want to for periods to try and catch up.
Excellent. So, Mike, this is going to be our last question, unless we have any more in from shareholders. This is a question which Robin has just asked, but it was one I also received via social media from another shareholder. But I'll use Robin's question here. So, with regard to grade and carat concentration, we've been guided that these improve with depth. Is that proving to be the case so far?
Yeah, again, a very good question. What we found actually, and we found it in KV1 because it's the first pipe, I think, where we've gone into what I would call pure kimberlite. And we found a couple of things of interest there. First of all, yes, you seem to get a more consistent and improved grade. And also you're obviously getting into harder rock, harder kimberlite. And that takes me back to this lockup of diamonds that we need to recrush and recover, moving from the 70 to the 90. But, from a straight bookkeeping perspective, and we haven't yet convinced the geologists, but if you take a pipe and say to yourself, well, the top 20% of it is low grade because it's diluted by non-kimberlite material, and the average grade for the whole pipe is X, then the bottom 80%, the bottom 80% you would think should be a better grade. We've yet to absolutely prove it, but we certainly are seeing a much more consistent situation.
Yeah.
Linking closer to the in situ grade that we've been told is in the ground.
So again, just from layperson's perspective, so I understand, does that mean that sort of just the deeper you get even though if you maintain production output where it is, there's the potential for revenue to increase simply because you're encountering bigger and potentially better quality diamonds?
I'd rather put it in a way that by going into pure kimberlites, the kimberlite hosts the diamonds to a large degree, although we did get diamonds in the first 20 meters, which is a combination of kimberlite and other rocks. But the host rock for diamonds are generally kimberlite. So you would say that when you're in pure kimberlites, you should get much closer to the in situ grade of that pipe, and therefore a higher average grade consistently. And that really, I think we've got a little way to go to prove that, but the trends seem to be leaning in that direction at this stage.
Okay, so I've been reminded that there's a question I haven't asked from Robin, which I'll put now. So Robin's asked what the company's current cash position is. Obviously, I wouldn't expect you to answer that because that would have to be via an RNS. But the second half of Robin's question is: can investors assume that apart from an acquisition, you'll be not returning to the market for additional funds? So in other words, I think what Robin's asking here is in terms of sort of how the business is going to develop. So what are your plans now, sort of moving forward, just to keep increasing production?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. It's a very difficult one to answer. The evaluation work, I can only say the evaluation work we're doing is linked to saying that we've got a couple of options. When you're talking about taking production up from 330,000 to say 750,000 tons a year, that's obviously got a cost to it, a capital cost to it. The question is, at what speed do you do it, and what's the most, if you like, the most efficient and shareholder value add approach? And that's what we're working through. That's the reason why we're not standing out there and saying exactly what we're doing. We're just trying to work our way through that process to see how we can tackle that and how we should tackle it in the best interest of the shareholders. But if we take it to the level that we believe we should be, it's a significant increase in production. It's just a question of how quickly you want to get there. How quickly do you want to introduce electricity, national grid, etc.? Those are really the questions that the board and the management are working through at this stage.
So again, I would imagine though that, again, this is from a layperson's perspective, but with the progress that you've already demonstrated since you took over, the production increases, the revenue increases, operationally profitable in the second half of last year, I would imagine that's going to open up sort of a variety of different potential options for the company to be able to choose, the pace at which it accelerates its growth. Is that a fair enough assumption to make when looking at BlueRock?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think what we did say to the market is, we're not going to be coming back to the market as has been in the past, to finance operations. They're financing themselves. The question is, how do you deal with the future, and what's the best, what is the best option for all parties involved? So, I can't say any more than that, except that we just need to make sure we get that right before we decide the way forward.
I mean, and from what I've watched with the company, because I mean, you may or may not remember, Mike, but our original conversation when we first spoke last year, I was somewhat skeptical, let's say, after the previous history of the previous team. And I mean, one of the things I remember you telling me at the time was that you were very sort of focused on cost, very focused on getting that PLC overhead under control, and then obviously bringing in the right people to manage the company operationally, because what it really did need was that step change internally to run the mine properly. And obviously, what I've seen over the last 12 months is that I think, unlike a lot of, again, your peers certainly in this sector, is it does really appear to me that you've followed through on that plan and been true to your word.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's kind of you. Obviously, we've got lots of challenges still, but none of them are, I think they're all, one can overcome them. That's for sure, with the right people and skills.
Okay. Well, let's talk then. Let's just wrap up and talk a bit more about the resource. So you've put into the public domain, some pretty hefty figures attached to that resource and its potential value over the course of the life of mine. Could you talk us a bit more through that, and what potential upside you see from delivering on step 2 of your strategic plan?
I'll just try to understand your question a little better. Then I think the resource statement's out there, and to change that in any way, you have got to do a fair amount of work with your competent person, and to prove to him that you believe the resource has got more capacity. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the key things there are obviously the more you mine out of a pit, the more information he has in terms of what assumptions he made initially in putting that resource statement together versus what's actually coming out, and that may give him the confidence to relook at it. And then obviously having proven lower cost, as against estimated lower costs. Having proven lower cost allows one to put a different cost structure in terms of evaluating the depth that you can mine that particular pit to. So, the upside for the resource is really linked to, I think, those two areas. We obviously are putting the slot in KV3 during 2020 to look at this big area that's not been included. If that slot proves to have a grade that's economically mineable, that would allow our competent person to bring that volume into the resource. And so from that perspective, I think, we've got quite a lot of work to do in terms of those longer term mine plans and putting these new parameters in to see what we can do in terms of increasing the resource life of mine, which I think is very important in people's eyes. And then obviously, if we look at where we want to go in terms of volume, it either gives us X, Y, or Z years. And clearly the longer the better. And so it will all be part and parcel of this, although we would progress with what we're wanting to do while we're doing a lot of that work, because all that will do is extend the life. And the lower we get our cost down, generally the longer the life. But you've got to start tackling these pits, at the deemed final depths. You've got to start designing them fairly early in their life.
Understood. Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, Mike, thanks very much for your time this evening. Thank you very much to everybody for your questions as well. We'll publish the copy of this presentation and Q&A on Value the Markets tomorrow, and it will also be made available on the BlueRock website. So, Mike, once again, thanks very much for your time. It was very good to learn from you more about the company, and look forward to catching up with you again in the second half of next year.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for taking the time out. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.